Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to this week's live stream. Um, it is week 3. We're going to be talking about circulation. I want to apologize ahead for my raspy voice. Unfortunately, I lost it a few days ago. I'm getting it back. So, yes, I'll just be dealing with that. But today we're going to be looking at circulation within the heart, the blood, filling out some diagrams, and answering some questions. So, let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is similar to last week's live stream, where we're given a diagram and terms, and we're asked to sort those terms within the diagram. So the first thing states, oops, sorry, I lost the chat for a second. My Twitch is not showing the chat today. Okay, I got the chat now. Sorry about that. Cool. Okay. So, how is mammalian heart structure related to function? Diagram and describe the path a red blood cell takes from the capillary in your big toe to your heart and back to your big toe. At each point in the pathway, indicate whether the red blood cell is most likely picking up or losing oxygen. Indicate also the relative blood pressure that a part of the path is likely to have. Include all of the following terms in your diagram. So, though there's a lot of detail in this question, the key that I got related mostly just relates to first labeling the terms and then kind of going through that pathway as we're describing them. So if you look here, I'm just going to scroll down so that we're seeing the terms and part of the diagrams. So I'm just going to start from the top and kind of go in whatever order it puts it in. It might not be related immediately, but we'll do so as we go along. So first we're going to start with the aorta, and this guy right here is known as the aorta. It's very strong. Aorta is what pumps the oxygenated blood to the rest of our body. Super important. The next thing on the list is venules. Venules can be found in the diagram seen on the right, and that is basically a small vein that's right next to a capillary. So we're going to see venules right over here. Veins, as you can imagine, are right there as 3. Arteries are seen here. And think about A for away. That's a great way to remember arteries. So arteries bring that oxygenated blood to the rest of the body through the aorta. So the aorta goes to arteries, which goes to, next on our list, arterioles, which can be found here. Similar to venules, they are the small arteries. Arterioles. All right, capillaries. Capillaries are kind of like the intermediate between the venules and the arterioles. It's where the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood like meet. You know how you see pictures of the sea that meets with a lake or something, and there's that really stark line between the two. You can think of that as like a capillary. It's kind of where those water beds meet. It's where those different levels of oxygenated blood meet. Capillaries. Oh, I didn't say this at the beginning of the stream, but I will be putting in the form for extra credit probably around 220 and 230. Moving more specifically to the heart, we have the right atrium, which is found right here. I know that it can get, oh, that is wrong. Sorry, people. Got that mixed up with the ventricle. The heart was always arteries, capillaries, veins. Oh, that's a really great way to remember that. Thank you for putting that in the chat. So somebody just said, remembering the relationship between veins, arteries, capillaries is that it's in alphabetical order. Arteries, capillaries, veins, A, C, V. So it's awesome. Thank you. So the right atrium is in fact here. It's kind of tricky to remember. I say that just because it is for me, but they're flipped from our point of view. So the right atrium, when we're looking at a picture, is actually on the left-hand side, and vice versa. The left atrium is therefore right here. The right ventricle is seen right here. Oh, sorry about my voice, you all. The left ventricle is found here. Yes, and I will be putting in the form around 220 and 230, most likely 220. Does anybody have any questions so far? Oh, of course, this is always a little bit out of sight. Sorry everybody, I'm going to put this down. So the coronary arteries, they're not really seen on this diagram. I'm going to draw them on the side, but they are the arterial blood vessels of coronary circulation, so they transport oxygenated blood to the heart muscle. So this is kind of a cross section. The picture that we're seeing on the left is a cross section into a heart, so we can clearly see the atrium, that sort of thing. But if we were to cover the heart, let's say just right here, a little small one, had it looking like this, had, you know, the outside with the pulmonary artery right here, and different blood vessels, things. So we would see, I know it's counterintuitive for it to be in blue than red, but you know how it has these structures on the top of it. So these are what we would call the coronary arteries, because that is what puts the oxygenated blood to the heart muscle. The heart muscle, the cardiac muscle, what surrounds the heart. Okay, the heart, obviously, we're seeing that right here. That's what we've been labeling is the heart. Oh, it says heart internal organs. Sorry. This must have been a typo. So heart internal organs, lungs, digestive tract. We can see that more clearly here on the right side where we're seeing the lungs. And this diagram down here is kind of just representative of the rest of the body. So that is showing the internal organs like the lungs, the digestive tract, where all of that oxygenated blood will go. I'll put 12 here and 12 there. Skeletal muscle aids in, I'm so sorry about my voice, aids in circulation because though cardiac muscle is what's involved in the pumping, there is a lot of skeletal muscle surrounding that aids in the structural support of those arteries to go throughout the body. That's where, the oxygenated blood flows into. It gets a lot of support from skeletal muscle. So we're not seeing that directly here, but we can imagine it outside the lungs, outside of the rest of the body, and so forth. Okay, so this was that diagram, and now we're going to go on to the heart, the chambers, musculature, and then specifics within that. So it says, A, draw the heart and its chambers, including the differences in musculature. We have that similar heart that we did above. We have the right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. So, though B is not seen, unfortunately, on this, what it's asking is explain the differences in musculature and how to use that in explaining the normal functions of each chamber. So we're just going to be dissecting atriums, ventricles, what kind of muscles that they have, and how it aids in circulation and what role it plays. So for the atrium, both right and left are thin. And what that means is that the blood flows through the atria into the ventricles. There's not a lot of force that needs to be in the atrium. We can see here how much thinner this muscle is comparatively to how thick this ventricle muscle is. And that's because the atrium don't need that much force. They're not pumping the blood. They're not pushing it anywhere. It's more of a place where the blood flows into. So that is what explains the thinness of those walls. So blood flows through. When it flows into the ventricles from the atrium, they only have to push that blood a few centimeters into the ventricles. And so when the blood goes into the ventricles and flows into here, into here, into here, eventually that ventricle is going to overflow and overfill. And so what that does is it helps initiate the ventricular contraction. The right ventricle pumps its contents to the lungs, while the left ventricle pumps to the aorta and the rest of the body. So right ventricle to lungs, left ventricle to body. So if we were to then talk about the musculature of the ventricles, we would say thick musculature, used to pump blood to other organs. And by other organs, of course, we mean the lungs and then the rest of the body. So within discussing the ventricle itself, we can also talk about the differences. Yes, I can. Sorry. I hope that helps. Okay, perfect. Within the ventricles being thicker than atrium themselves, they can also just like be different between the two. So as we discussed, the right ventricle goes to the lungs, but the left ventricle goes to the rest of the body. So we can see here, and I'm going to use a different color, how much thicker the muscle the right ventricle, the left ventricle has over the right. The left ventricle has to push to a greater distance. Lungs to the heart is shorter than all the way from our heart to our hands or to the bottom of our feet to our toes. That's a much greater distance. We're going to need more force and more oomph to push that blood everywhere, and that explains why the left ventricle is a little bit bigger than the right. All right, C, include your description of the functions of the SA node, which is also known as the pacemaker, the AV node, and the AV semilunar valves. So, semilunar valve is the heart valve at the base of the aorta and the pulmonary artery. It has cusps or flaps that prevent cusps or flaps. Oh my gosh, I did it again. Cusps or flaps that prevent the backflow of blood. So when we put blood into the ventricle, we don't want it being put. We don't want much backflow because when the heart is pumping, it's because we want that circulation. Backflow means that circulation is not happening optimally. And so that's why we have these valves to pretty much prevent that backflow from happening. We have different valves at different places. So the pulmonary valve is seen right here, which this structure here is called the pulmonary artery, hence pulmonary valve. We also have aortic valve, which can be seen right here, and the aorta is right there. I'm going to do that in two different colors. So aorta, aortic valve. This prevents backflow. I'm going to put the form is now in the chat for you to get that extra credit, just so everybody knows. So now that we have the nodes in place that we're talking about, the SA node, also known as a pacemaker, triggers the atria to contract. The signal that is sent for that contraction is delayed at the AV node, which allows that atria to empty before the ventricles are signaled. So that delay is what helps that ventricle first get full and then pump. You don't want it just immediately pumping. It's not going to be pumping the optimal amount of oxygenated blood that it needs to, or deoxygenated blood where it needs to go to the lungs and come back. You don't want something half filled before sending it off. You know, you want to fill the package as much as you can to alleviate, you know, the amount of shipments that need to go. You know what analogy, and just in case, using the post office as an example in case is what I mean. If we need something else. So, Drew's atria contraction, AV node is delayed to prevent ventricular contraction. Okay. These semilunar valves discussed are one-way valves that prevent backflow, as we discussed. We can also see one-way valves in veins as well. Okay. Just gonna get water real quick. Sorry. Okay. So 3 is asking, while in utero, the wall between the two atria of the human fetal heart is not complete. An opening, the foramen oval, allows the foramen oval allows blood from the two atria to mix. Normally, at birth, this hole seals over and the two atria are separated from each other. What would be the consequences to the infant if this hole did not seal over at birth? So if this mixing continued to occur, it didn't seal properly, so we're not having that separation, then oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood would mix. And we can see how this is a problem. If we can't separate the two, then we can't get that blood that doesn't have oxygen, and we can't get that oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. If we can't separate the two, then we can't be sufficiently giving our tissues enough oxygen. We also can't be resupplying that deoxygenated blood with oxygen. And so what this does in babies is called blue baby syndrome. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. Basically, the blood going to the body carries less oxygen than would a normal baby, and so the baby turns blue when it has higher metabolic activity. And so those babies generally need greater care, and they need to be watched more closely just because their activities require higher amounts of oxygen input per unit time. One of the most common congenital defects of the cardiovascular system is called transposition of the great arteries. In infants who have this defect, the pulmonary artery exits from the heart where the aorta should, and the aorta exits where the pulmonary artery should. All other circulatory connections are normal. So the only thing that's flipped are those two major things that we talked about. So the right ventricle goes to the pulmonary artery. That is now going through the aorta. So our deoxygenated blood would go from the right ventricle, pulmonary artery, through the pulmonary circuit to the lungs, and back into the left atrium, through the left ventricle, into the aorta to the rest of the body. That's been flipped. Now the left ventricle is going to the pulmonary artery, right ventricle is going to the aorta. So a diagram and describe the circulation. If we needed a diagram, everything else would be the same. Those two things would be flipped. So we can just go maybe back a page or two. Go down a lot of it. And so the aorta then will come here to the right ventricle. The pulmonary artery will go to the left. So that's what that would look like. And now going back to the question. One pumps the blood when it's switched. So if they're reversed, as we showed, one pumps the blood from the left side of the heart to the lungs and back through the pulmonary vein, and the other pumps the blood from the right side of the heart by the aorta to the body and back via the anterior and posterior vena cava. So all it's saying is that the flow of blood is switched. If this sounds like gibberish, if it sounds like a lot of information, I know that it's confusing. The heart can totally be confusing. For me, it took a lot to understand it fully. What this question is mainly trying to get you to do is understand the circuit, how it normally would act. And if you have a solid understanding of that, try to challenge yourself in thinking of what it would be like when things were reversed. Can you map where the blood goes? Can you come back? Do you understand how it changes, what it changes? It's a very advanced, probably more than you'll see, but it's just a way to test you on your knowledge of the flow of blood throughout the body. So you say so instead of going from pumping right, coming back into the left, pumping left, coming back into the right side of the heart, left side comes back into left, right side goes back into left. And so, yeah, cool. B, what type of treatment would such an infant need? unless something is done immediately, the infant would die because there's no mixing of where the blood goes. You're not getting oxygenated blood into the aorta, into the rest of the body and back. It's just going to lungs and back, body back, body back. So it's not, the body is not getting the amount of oxygen through the blood that it normally would get. And so if not treated immediately, patient would die. But there is an operation that could reverse those arteries. It would take a long time, but eventually it would just allow that some oxygen be pumped to the body. So otherwise, operation. I'm not sure how common this is actually, but it is interesting to see how much that can affect our well-being and how our body functions. Okay, so the next part is asking how are heart and lung structure and function related to metabolic rate? Question 1 asks, describe the simplest type of closed circulatory system. Include the function of each part of the system and explain how the structure of each part is related to its function. The simplest closed circulatory system includes a heart and a muscular organ that pumps blood that will go to arteries, then arterioles, to capillaries, venules, veins, and then finally back to the heart. In this simple system, for specificity's sake, arteries are more muscular than veins, just to withstand the higher blood pressure resulting from that heart's pumping and contraction. So capillaries are, in comparison, just one cell wall thick. So they're very, very, very thin. Arteries are thick to withstand pressure, but capillaries need to be thin in order for exchange to occur between oxygen and the tissues. So moving on to 2. Just move that down. If you want to increase the rate of metabolism in an organism, you need to increase A, the rate of food and oxygen delivery to the cells or body, and B, the rate of removal of waste products from the cells or body. In the evolution of vertebrates, what modification of the circulatory system and or circulatory function have occurred to increase metabolic rate? So this is where we're going to go and kind of dissect. First, we're going to talk about fish, then amphibians, and then birds and mammals. So fish have 2-chambered hearts. Which just means 1 atrium, 1 ventricle. We have 4. Deoxygenated blood pumped from the heart to the gills, and then 1 once it has oxygen, it travels from the gills to the body. Deoxygenated to gills. Oxygenated. Okay, so in capillaries, what's really cool about fish is actually like when it's exchanging, the blood pressure is reduced to 0. And so the blood flow from the gills to the body is slow, even when muscular contractions are happening in the body wall, which is kind of cool. So it has a very, very controlled, very slow exchange. So we can just put that controlled slow exchange. The next one is amphibians and reptiles. So they have a 3-chambered heart as opposed to 2. And this flow is deoxygenated blood to right atrium to lungs, and then capillaries where exchange occurs to oxygenated blood left atrium body. So we can see things becoming more complex. Here there is only one ventricle. And so that one ventricle just tells us that there's still that potential of mixing between oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, which we see even higher in fish. The last one is birds and mammals. So birds/mammals. We have 2 atria, 2 ventricle, so 4-chambered heart. 4 chambers. So it goes from, the body goes to right atrium to right ventricle to the lungs to the left atrium left ventricle to body. So no O2 coming from the body. Once it goes to the lungs, then there is oxygen to the left atrium, left ventricle, and then that oxygenated blood goes to the body. Okay. Both reptiles and mammals obtain their energy via aerobic respiration formula, but also need to be able to maintain internal homeostasis in order to survive. Given this, would you expect the lungs of the lizard, an ectotherm, to have more or less alveoli per unit area than the lungs of the rat, an endotherm? Assume the overall SAV ratios, so surface area to volume, of the rat and lizard are about the same. Explain the physiological reasoning behind your answer. In this case, the ectotherm, so the lizard, would have fewer alveoli and that's because the lizard requires less energy per unit time than the rat. So similar to us, the rat's normal body temperature is higher than the environment. So for example, it's 50 degrees where I'm at right now, but my body temperature is still 98. So my body temperature is warmer, like the rat. And so its enzymes are functional at this higher temperature. So we need higher body temperature to require higher level of cellular respiration. And because of that, higher levels of oxygen and food intake are then required. So that's why lizards have fewer alveoli, because we need more. We need more oxygen. We need more food just to be able to maintain this body temperature and just to be able to maintain this level of metabolism. On average, would you expect the heart rate of the lizard to be higher or lower than the heart rate of the rat? Explain the physiological reasoning behind your answer. Similarly to above, what we answered in A about having a high body temperature, a higher metabolic rate, and how that needs more oxygen, it needs more delivery of food and blood that holds oxygen. We need more delivery to our cells to maintain our metabolism. So the heart rate of the endotherm, the rat, is going to be higher than the lizard. Okay, 4. Based on your knowledge of surface area to volume ratios, metabolic rates, and cardiopulmonary physiology, would you expect the following to be higher or lower for a human infant as compared to an adult? Explain the physiological reasoning behind your answers. body temperature. So body temperature, how do I explain this? Okay, so we have a hotter temperature than the environment. Typically, excuse me, is temperature is lost across surface area. So we'll say temp cross surface area. Babies have a much higher surface area to volume ratio than an adult does. So the infant will actually tend to lose heat a lot more rapidly than an adult, and which is that's also the same for small warm-blooded animals compared to different species of the same. So like a Pomeranian dog versus a German Shepherd. The Pomeranian will likely lose more heat because of the higher surface area to volume ratio because it's much smaller across surface area. So infant has higher. Okay, B. Asking about heart rate. So because the infant is losing more heat than the adult, it will also have a higher metabolic rate. And thus increased heart rate. C. Oxygen consumption rate per unit mass of body. So similarly to B, the infant will require a higher metabolic rate to maintain a constant body temperature. And so the oxygen consumption with the heart rate will be higher in the infant than adult. Okay, so questions 5 to 7. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna get water really quick. Oh no. Excuse me. So these are a few true false questions. So at rest, an average human's mean arterial blood pressure, MABP, is 120 over 80. As a person increases his or her activity or their activity, however, a variety of physiological modifications must be made to support increased activity. For example, assume you are late for an exam and run 4 blocks to get there on time. Which of the following would occur during your 4-block run? Indicate whether the following statements are true or false. Explain your reasoning. Number 5. As you run, your muscles will require more oxygen per unit time than when walking. So this is true. We will need more ATP. And so oxygen is required for that increased cellular respiration. Number 6. The percentage of carbon dioxide in your blood will increase and your blood pH will increase. So this is false. It is true that there will be higher levels of carbon dioxide, but higher levels of carbon dioxide will actually make your blood pH lower. Yes, increased CO2 levels, but decreased pH. And then 7, your MABP will increase because both the heart rate and stroke volume will increase. This is true. So to increase the rate of delivery of both food and oxygen to the muscles, the heart rate and stroke volume will increase. Okay. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to go to the last page. So questions 8 to 11 refer to the dissociation curves for 2 mammalian hemoglobin to answer the following questions. So I'm going to scroll down. We see percent saturation of hemoglobin with O2 and then partial pressure of oxygen or oxygen tension. These are just a few true, false, and then 11 is some more questions. So we'll see how much we get through. At oxygen tension T naught, both hemoglobins have released most of their oxygen. This is true. The percent of saturation of both of them is near 0 on the graph at T naught, as we see here. Nine. At oxygen tension T1, hemoglobin B is carrying less oxygen than hemoglobin A. So we see that to be false. HBB has higher percent saturation of oxygen than HbA. If comparison of curves A and B illustrates the Bohr effect in a single species, then curve B represents the dissociation at the higher concentration of CO2, lower pH. So this is also false. At higher carbon dioxide levels or lower pH, then we would expect the HB to release more of its oxygen to the active tissues. So curve A is actually a better representation of what happens at a lower pH. So we would just say curve A And then finally, for question 11, in addition to CO2, contracting muscle cells produce a large amount of heat energy. It has been demonstrated that an increase in temperature independent of carbon dioxide levels encourages the blood to give up its oxygen to exercising tissues. Given this information, would you expect A or B below to be true, and explain your answer? Curve A would be the lower temperature curve and B would be the higher temperature curve, or curve B would be the lower temperature curve and curve A would be the higher temperature curve. This would actually be correct, choice B, wherein curve B would be the lower temperature curve and curve A would be the higher temperature curve, because in comparison, curve A relates to more of its oxygen at the same partial pressures of oxygen compared to curve B. So we see right here curve B is the lower temp curve. Okay, cool. So that is the end of today's stream. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm sorry about my voice. I might have to cut it off at 3 just because it kind of hurts to talk. I've been talking a lot this week, so I think it's just been a strain. So thank you guys for bearing with me and my voice. All right, thank you guys so much. Have a lovely weekend. I'll see you. Sorry, I was going to say so much because I was just saying thank you. Yeah, it's weird. It's just my voice. Oh, yeah, I'll totally post the link again. Let me do that. But yeah, thank you so much. Totally willing to help with all your questions. Feel free to email me if you have any more. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I'll see you next week. Let me send that form one more time, and then I'm going to go ahead and head out. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a good night.